Morning, everyone. Thank you. I appreciate everyone coming. In the chat box, you'll see that we've got Jacob Griffith. He is and there he is on the screen. He is our chief legal here at the OPI. And I do have an agenda that seems quite lengthy, and we need to be a little bit understanding, and we're going to move some things around. So we're going to discuss number 3 right away at this point. This has to deal with Senate Bill 72 and 157. And we looked at this. This has to deal with children participating in extracurricular sports. So if we can go ahead and begin with that. If you have anything else to add in the chat box, please do. I know Jake has given his contact information if there's any questions. I do know our guidance has gone out on these specific bills just a few minutes ago. At the end of all of our education advocates, we also always send all the information that we have. So Jake, if you just want to walk us through. And we also have Michelle Snowberger from the AG's office, who also had a second view of this. I believe she's also on. So Jake, if you'd like to just begin on 72.
All right, good morning, everybody, and thank you, Superintendent. My name is Jake Griffith. I'm the new Chief Legal here at the Office of Public Instruction. I've been here for a little over 3 weeks now. It's very nice to meet all of you and be a part of this meeting. What we'd like to talk about is both Senate Bill 157 and Senate Bill 72. And I think, Sarah, you might be sharing the screen there. We're going to start with 157. I've invited Michelle Snowberger. She's an Assistant Attorney General from Agency Legal Services. She was assisting our agency prior to my arrival, and she's the one that authored both of these guidances that we're introducing today. You should have received those by email, and we will be sending them out after this meeting as well. But I would like to turn it over to Michelle, since she did author these, to walk you through both of these guidance documents. So Michelle, I'd invite you to join in.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Michelle Snowberger, and I'm here to talk a little bit about the recent legislation, Senate Bill 157 and Senate Bill 72, which provides opportunities for students who are either attending a non-public or homeschool, and either who are not enrolled in public school or partially enrolled in a school district, to participate in extracurricular activities. So Senate Bill 157 provides that opportunity for participation for any type of extracurricular activity. So in Senate Bill 157, there's no exact definition of what an extracurricular activity is, but we would say that would be something that is not that would be available to a public school students outside of the normal courses. There are participation requirements. This individual who's seeking to participate in that extracurricular activity must be a resident of the school district of the school for which they wish to participate. And they have to be attending either a non-public school or be in homeschool that meets the requirements for 25109. And that just allows for that to meet basic requirements to ensure that that student is actually attending school somewhere. So there is no definition for oh, I'm sorry. There is no definition as to whether or not the resident student who wishes to apply must participate in the same geographic location. For instance, if there's more than one school, do they have to reside within that residency? We're asking schools to make sure that what they are doing and how they're interpreting this is to provide equal opportunity and for equality to both public and non-public schools. So you need to make sure that you are following the interscholastic organization rules. So if you are participating in a high school sport, you would need to follow the rules of the MHSA. and whether or not there are other rules that your school district currently has regarding that participation. So the participation standards, the student has to meet the same standards for participation as those required for full-time public school students. They have to comply with the same rules of the interscholastic organization. They have to maintain academic eligibility if it's required for participation. Now remember, this provision applies to K through 12 grades, so that, you know, we often sometimes focus on that high school sports activities, but this really is for any extracurricular activity that the school district is providing. So if there is a requirement that student meet a certain academic eligibility, they have to provide proof of that academic eligibility in writing, and it has to be completed by the appropriate individual, either the non-public schools head administrator or the homeschool educators providing student instruction. And that has to be attested to. I'm sorry, someone's is not on mute. And that has to be attested to. So that's a certification or declaration that the information is true and correct. For students who are in homeschool, the school district, the school principal must verify that information that for academic eligibility. That cannot include any form of student assessment. And really the determination as to whether or not they've been able to verify academic eligibility is determined at that local level by that individual school district and those individual principals. However, we are saying that needs to be, there needs to be some equality in that. For instance, you could review recent schoolwork or tests completed. You could, if they're in a formal program, that could be documentation from that program as to what their grades are, or any other information that's reasonably required to verify academic eligibility. So we're providing this guidance, and it will be going out. The OPI will be sending it out here, I would believe, shortly, but they can comment about that. And then we can look now at Senate Bill 72. Senate Bill 72 is a way for school districts who are having students participate in those extracurricular activities, actually use that participation in calculating their A and B. This, there are certain requirements. It's not every extracurricular activity. The extracurricular activities that are allowed for this calculation are delineated in the statute. The student has to complete the program, and it's either a 6-week minimum of 6 weeks or a minimum of between 6 weeks and 18 weeks. And so those are all delineated here. The school district is not required to use this to calculate A and B or to assist in that calculation of A and B. It is discretionary, but it's just a way for schools to be able to, who are providing these extracurricular activities to either non-enrolled or partially enrolled students, to be able to use that into their A and B calculation. It's a little bit of a technical, because this document is more directed at school districts on how that is calculated, but it's going to give an overview of that. Both of these bills are effective on July 1 of this year, so they're in effect currently. And both of these, again, apply to all K through 12 public schools. So again, this information will be going out. The OPI will be sending this out. We are also preparing a document to assist schools in like a form to assist schools in gathering student information about the extracurricular activity, and then also on to be able to help them with the calculation of that A and B, and then for an audit function as well as regards to that. So with that, I'm kind of finished with my presentation. If anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to entertain them.
Thank you, Michelle. And folks, what we do with education advocates, if you're new to us here, we do these once a month, and this agenda seems to be very robust, but we do ask for feedback. This is guidance. We are not doing rulemaking at this time. This is very unique and new to Montana. And so that's why we've had multiple conversations ahead of this conversation here today with you. You received these documents, about 10, 15 minutes before this meeting. And as we do with education advocates, a recording of this will also go out, as well as any documents that you will be seeing today. So any questions you might have for Jake or for Michelle?
And if anybody does have any questions that come up, I did leave my contact information in the chat box. Please feel free to email me or call me as well.
Thank you, Jake. Thank you, Michelle. And we're here to help. Like I said, this is guidance. It's all new. Rulemaking would have taken a lengthy period of time, as well as it just, since it went live July 1, we wanted to make sure that all of our communities across the state have an opportunity to have students participate. And that's what these two bills offer. So with that, let's go ahead and move to the number 2 on the agenda item. Thank you, Jacob. Thank you, Michelle. We're going to be moving into ARP and Essa, the maintenance of equity discussion. And I've got our CFO and Mr. Taylor that are also on the line. Thank you.
Okay.
Hey,
There you
Paul.
are.
We're just doing the old swivel here. Here we go.
Yeah. Good morning, everyone. I see a lot of familiar names on our viewing list this morning that were participating last week. So at the Ed Interim Committee and the Board of Public Education meeting. So thanks for listening to us last week, and thanks for being with us today. As we discussed last week, at both of those meetings, the maintenance of equity discussion is something that we are following closely here at the agency. And we have had meetings with the U.S. Department of Education on it, as well as with other state partners in the congressional delegation. And so it's an evolving process. And what we'd like to do now is, what I'd like to do rather, is turn it over to Paul Taylor, who, as many of you know, is an expert on A and B and the school funding formula. So he is better positioned to provide the details about this topic. So Paul, please go right ahead. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. So we try to go give a brief overview, and then I'd be happy to entertain your questions. So part of the American Rescue Plan Act, which is often termed ESSER 3, requires in one of the sections, the section is 2004, that section of the law is broken into 3 parts, A, B, and C. A is maintenance of effort, and then B and C are things associated there. It's a new term. It's maintenance of equity. And so that part B is a district level kind of maintenance of equity. It's a state level calculation that we'll have to perform. Basically what you do is you take all 400 or 398 operating school districts in the state and apply the SAPE poverty indicator to those districts for the most recent year available, sort them from highest poverty to lowest poverty, and then take either the top 50% or the top 20%, depending on which subpart of Part B is associated for high needs and then high poverty schools, and identify that those schools will not have state funding reduced to them in proportion to their enrollment in the same year. And so we've done those calculations here at the state. And again, I have to put the caveat on there like I always do. And I know some of you are probably cringing already, but our data is still preliminary. Now you can rest easier. But it's preliminary for two reasons. We don't have the fall collection of enrollment yet, as per the federal guidance. And also, we do know the entitlements to support state schools for FY22, with the exception of the guaranteed tax base aid calculation. We won't know until at least October, because I need the base mills, and we haven't done our data collection yet to determine how much state funding would go to schools for that. But preliminarily, when we look at the data at the state level for both high needs and high poverty, it seems that approximately a quarter of the schools will not maintain equity utilizing our preliminary data. This sort of, I want to segue into what is termed Part C, or I'm calling Part C of that 2004 calculation, which is additional maintenance of equity requirements for certain schools that do not meet exceptions. And this is slightly different. The Part B is a district level or a state issue calculation. The Part C would be for the districts that don't meet the exceptions, their distribution of funds into the school codes, into the school buildings within their district. And I'm going to have to hop here in 15 minutes because I actually have a meeting with the 19 LEAs involved. The exceptions were, just to be brief, if the LEA had less than 1,000 enrolled students, they were exempt. If the district had one single school building, they were exempt. And if the school district had multiple school buildings and yet only one, the grade was offered only in the one building for all 12 grades, those districts were exempt. And that's why I got the list from 400 LEAs across the state down to the 19 in question. So those schools, the calculation's slightly different at the school code level. It's a poverty indicator using the SAPE data again, indicated at the top 25% highest poverty. And in this case, its distribution to that school cannot be reduced greater than that of any, the school-wide level, if there was any reduction. There's a second qualifier also. The workforce at those schools cannot be significantly reduced either between 21, 22, and then 22 into 23. So it's both a distribution of funds and a workforce view. I'm going to work with these schools to ensure that they know that they're, need to comply with this section of law. Again, preliminary data. And I think maybe that's enough said. I'd be happy to take your questions if you have them at this time.
Thank you. Thank you, Paul. So just to put this, put this into a perspective, the ones that we've been discussing with our congressional partners, and I want to thank you very much for being on this call and having other conversations with us. That deals with the state general fund and how our state funding formula looks in an equitable manner of what to fulfill the spirit of the law. That's where the discussion is. We cannot waive any of these because these are written within the law. Therefore, we are asking for the Part B that Paul first discussed with our state formula to have there be equivalency between what the spirit of the law is asking and what we in Montana have determined with our state funding formula. The other part that he's discussing has to deal with how school districts distribute the dollars, making sure to the school itself, those school codes, that they are in a manner that is also purportment of the law in the equitable fashion. We put a lot of energy into both of these, and we just want to share with our partners here. If you have any questions, Paul is available as well as Dave. Any questions?
Superintendent, I just have a quick question. I was just reading an article this morning that talked about 105 school districts. Is that down to 19 now, or is that totally separate number?
Yeah,
Thanks.
thanks for the, sorry, Superintendent. Yeah, McCall, it's interesting. I do see maybe where that confusion became. So when I do the Part B, which is the high needs and the high poverty, and I take a look at the preliminary data, so it may not be 105 in the end, and we take a look at the calculation, approximately the 105 districts are currently viewed to not be maintaining equity. So that's a school district level view for that Part B of the calculation. When I talk about the 19 school districts involved with the school code level requirement, that's Part C of that section 2004. Does that help? Okay.
Thank you, Paul. Any further questions? Great question, McCall. And again, documents will be flying to you when we're finished here as well with what we have. But I have to stipulate again, is what Paul has said. This is all preliminary based on previous data. We won't be able to have our count until October to really know what this means. So it's a continued discussion. Thank you, Mr. Taylor. Thank you, Dave. All right, let's go ahead and let's talk about the Essa flexibility waiver. Dr. Mergel.
Good morning, Superintendent, and good morning to all of our education advocates out there. Yes, so I'd like to talk about the funding flexibility waiver that we put out from the OPI on June 24th to initiate public comment. And so the purpose of the funding flexibility waiver is for the OPI to provide to our districts flexibility to continue to use some of the federal dollars that they were not able to use this past school year. So it really relates to particular items. One is the carryover limitation for the Elementary and Secondary Education Act that was reauthorized under Essa for Title I Part A funds. The requirement limits an SEA's ability to grant an LEA waiver of 15% Title I Part A carryover. And so this flexibility waiver would allow us at the OPI to grant our districts more than 15% of their Title I Part A carryover from 2020 if they had those additional dollars and just were not able to spend them in this past school year as they had intended. The second component of this funding flexibility waiver is the period of availability of funds. And so that is related to extend the period of availability of federal 2019 funds for programs in which the district participates through September 30th of 2022. So as you all know, there's always like a year of hiding of when you can spend those funds down, and then the remaining of funds that are not spent are no longer available. So we want to take 2019 funds and be able to extend them a full year further. So we're taking any comments on those through July 24th, which is the end date. And so you can email us at essainput@mt.gov. And I will stand for any questions that you might have about this particular waiver.
Thank you, Dr. Mergel. Let's go ahead and move on. But first, before we do, if you could just share what great news that the Board of Public Ed offered the schools in some flexibility moving forward. If you could share what their actions did last week, and then if I can have you move into the state and the LEA plan that's required under ARP. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Superintendent. So last week on Thursday at the Board of Public Ed, we proposed that the schools could use their district ARP ESSER, the American Rescue Plan, that is due on the 24th, in place of the school continuous improvement plan. And so those are would be two separate plans. We've put together a template so those two plans can come together, so that districts are required to just put one plan together to really emphasize all of their improvement efforts moving forward. So we thank the Board of Public Education to really allow the flexibility to our school districts, so that there's one less plan and one plan that school districts need to put together and put all of that in place. So that is really good news. So talking about the ARP-LEA ESSER plan, I would say that that is due on August 24th from our school districts. We have put out a template, and it's available through the Teams application. It is a pretty user-friendly template. It does have some drop-down options, has all the requirements of what the plan needs to have in it for federal regulations. And so it really is a plan that outlines how districts are using the ARP-ESSER funding, and then the strategies. And so it's one of the requirements is they do have to use 20% of those ARP-ESSER funds to address any lost instructional time. And then they have to share how they're using the remaining 80% of their dollars. And so it's an opportunity for local communities to get together and to determine what their needs are, with many of our school districts who remained in person throughout the school year. So, that's a situation where maybe they want to think about accelerating learning. I think the last thing I want to say about this plan that's really critical is it does require meaningful consultation. And so that means really giving an opportunity to all stakeholders in a community to provide input, and then to consider their input in designing that plan. And so there's lots of different ways and best practices of how to do meaningful consultation. And so we're happy to support our districts and our leaders in any way that we can to establish this plan. Also, it will need to be updated every 6 months, which was another reason why we didn't want to have two separate plans and sought the flexibility. We know our districts are going to have to continue to come back to this plan and address any issues over the next every 6 months until 2023, when the ARP-ESSER funding comes to a close. I will tell you that we did submit the state ARP-ESSER plan on June 7th. We did receive some feedback from the Department of Education. It was very minimal revisions that were requested. Those revisions were submitted to the department today. And so we are anticipating to have a response back to the department no later than the end of July here, probably before August 1st. So we will let you know as soon as we hear back from them. That is an important piece because that was a requirement to receive the 1/3 funding that was held back for ARP-ESSER. So currently we have 2/3 of the funding. The state plan needed to be submitted and approved in order for the remaining 1/3 to flow. So we'll be in touch. We're very optimistic that we'll be hearing very quickly back from the department on those final small few revisions that they had requested of us. I will tell you that if you go to the OPI, just to show you really quick, where you can go to find all of the resources that I'm talking about today about the ARP-ESSER plan. You can see it here on the screen. You go to the main webpage at opi.mt.gov. Right under the superintendent's picture is a button that says Find ESSER Information. When you click on that button, we've got lots of guidance documents, lots of tools that districts can use to help them as they're developing their plan. We have a PDF version of the plan outside of the Teams application, if you will, so that districts can kind of manipulate that, share that with others, kind of wordsmith, craft up their draft plan, and then be able to copy and paste that into the template when they're done. So we're just really providing ongoing information there. We're on another channel right now, sharing information with our stakeholders about the district ARP-ESSER plans. We are posting recordings of those as well as the slideshows on this particular tab. So I just encourage you to continue to come back to this place on our webpage to just see new and current information, because we are keeping it very current to try to be sure we're answering all questions. I know that today, for example, we're offering in our session hot topics, meaning topics that or questions that seem to be coming in from the field about the ARP-ESSER plan. And so we're trying to really, work together as a large community, as a state, to put forward those plans to meet local needs. And so we look forward to helping you do whatever it needs to take to get those dollars to really influence your communities and your families and your students. Superintendent, I will stand for any questions that anyone might have.
So Julie, thank you very much. A great wealth. If you would please just share where Montana is amongst the whole horse race of the rest of the 49 states.
So there are currently 12 states have their ARP-ESSER plans approved and posted on the U.S. Department webpage. We anticipate that ours will be coming in here in probably within the top 25, if you will. And there are some states that still have not gotten their first version in to be reviewed, if you will. And so I feel like we are in a good spot in terms of where we're at, and that, the revisions that were required are not that significant, that it's going to be really easy to, turn around and get that back to us pretty quickly. I think we wanted to put together, a thoughtful team. We did all of that work, Superintendent, around very quickly getting out stakeholder engagement surveys, really using our opportunity to learn data, hosting webinars, hosting, stakeholder input conversations, and then really just kind of taking all of that information and putting a plan together that would directly answer the question so that we could get those dollars into our state, so that we then can get those dollars to the districts for them to use moving forward. So we feel good about where we're at in terms of the timeline. It has been a fast timeline, and we realize that it is equally as fast as what expectations are for districts. We know that there were 2 plans that were required, and there was one plan that was required that was the safe return continuation plan that needed to be posted on June 24th by our districts. And then this second plan was required to come to the districts within 90 days of receiving the funding. So that's why that date is August 24th as well. So lots of dates as we look at heading into the new school year, but we definitely are here to support our school districts in every way that we can.
Thank you, Dr. Mergel. Any questions for Julie? And she stands available. I mean, the entire team does, as we're working to aid our school districts to get their August 24th plan in, and then have that being changed again and reviewed in a very transparent process at their local level every 6 months. Excellent. Well, let's move on. We do have quite more to hear, and there's a couple things that aren't necessarily on the agenda that I also wanted to bring attention to. So let's go ahead. We have Chapter 57, some other great work with our partner with the Board of Public Ed. We have Crystal Andrews, who is looking at licensing. Good morning, Crystal.
Good morning, Superintendent. I am glad to be here with you all. We did have an exciting week last week. I've shared a lot of this information with some of you, but I'm very excited to share it with you here again. And actually, I have a different slide. Sarah, can I put my slide up? Do you mind? I just tweaked it a little bit. I think it'll be more useful for everyone. I appreciate it. Perfect. Okay, can you see that okay?
Sure.
Okay, thank you. Sorry about that. So what I would like to share with you, can you hear me okay? Okay, sorry, here we go. What I would like to share with you are just where we are with the Chapter 57 task force for review and recommendations. I'm sure everyone knows, Chapter 57 is our educator licensure rules. And I guess I should start by, for those of you that don't know me, I am Crystal Andrews, and I am the educator licensure director at the OPI. So I appreciate going through this with you. We have been co-facilitating sessions for about 5 weeks now. I am working with Jacob Williams, who is with Ed Northwest, the Region 17 Comp Center, And he provides expertise in facilitation, and I am providing research and historical data and input from the OPI. I also create the agendas and PowerPoints and meeting times and work with the task force on those things. The members of the task force consists of 25 members, including administrators, trustees, teachers, parents, and EPP representatives. We have been meeting weekly on Thursdays, and the whole goal is to form recommendations for revisions to Chapter 57 to present to the superintendent. We had such an amazing amount of people wanting to be involved with this work that we made a second layer of a group called the feedback group, which consists of 17 members that meet monthly. Basically, their job is to give input on what the task force recommendations are and make some suggestions for review. So it's that second layer of eyes from the public to look at these revisions. We agreed as a task force on our norms of behavior and always review that. So the biggest point to this slide is that there is a consensus vote where 60% needs to reach consensus for the supermajority. And a little background. So before I started in this position, there was a lot of legwork that was done by Dr. Mergel and the deputy superintendent Allen and many more. And they worked with Ed Northwest by conducting, Ed Northwest conducted research on reciprocity. They've also sent out surveys to the public, first-year teachers on the process of licensure. We've received recommendations from the Teacher Recruitment and Retention Task Force Steering Committee, and I'll get into that in a minute. And then there were focus groups that were put out to the public, school-based community members, College of Ed reps, students, grads, K-12 student groups, and a summary report was formed from that. So with all of that background, as a co-facilitator, what we're trying to do is look at the areas that were discussed, with some revision work. And from that, the main areas that we've looked at so far, and we haven't gotten to them are, was the counselor to administrator pathway. That was brought up in that teacher recruitment and retention task force. So that is where we started. And now we're working within reciprocity. And as you can see, there are many areas within reciprocity, not just one blanket view of it, but looking at coursework and experience and assessments, advanced credentials, the military spouses, alternative pathways, and endorsements. So right now, that is what the subcommittee is working on. We call those the big buckets of reciprocity, and task force members were divided into subcommittees to look at those areas and discuss those this week in our meeting. From there, we're thinking or looking at the praxis assessment and then into class 4 and class 8 licenses. Of course, these aren't the only areas, but they were, really the themes that came out of all of those different, areas within the background and the research. So that is why we started with these.
So Crystal, let me
yeah.
just stop for a moment. Would you please share what a class 4 and a class 8 are? We have some members on this
Of
call
course.
that may not know what those classes attribute to. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for reminding me to be a little bit more clear with what things are. So the class 4 licenses are the career and technical education licenses, and class 8 are the dual credit post-secondary licenses. And so I also wanted to point out, we do have resources out there. Right on the front page of our webpage is a link to our sessions that we conduct for Chapter 57 and 58 that Zach will be talking to you about, with the agendas for each week, and then the session link if you would like to attend as the public. They're open as well. And my contact information is listed there as well. And I am available for any questions now or in the future. Thank you.
Crystal, thank you. Timeline, just for our members that are here. This work has been going on even through COVID. And could you kind of just share where the timeline would be moving forward?
That's a really good question, and it's kind of an ongoing timeline. So for right now, we are definitely trying to get information on the areas that we've looked at, sort of our recommendations to you and then by September, so that then we can at least update the Board of Public Ed at their next meeting on where we are with that.
Excellent, excellent. So if I'm understanding, then by September, we'll have something to the Board of Public Ed. It won't be finalized as this work still continues with
Yes.
that. Any questions for Crystal? Thank you, Crystal. Any questions? Great. Let's go ahead and move on. I know we have Mr. Hawkins. Zach, let's go ahead and discuss Chapter 58.
Thank you, Superintendent Artson, and greetings, Ed advocates. It's great to be here with all of you today, and thank you for what you do for Montana students. So I've been asked on behalf of the OPI to co-facilitate the Chapter 58 review and recommendations in collaboration with the task force as well as Ed Northwest. And I've been working with Kimberly Barnes and Jacqueline Raphael from Ed Northwest. And I will, a lot of what I'm going to talk about is very similar to what Crystal has touched on process-wise, but I'll also touch a little bit on sort of some specific things to the discussions that have been going on around Chapter 58. So if I could have the next slide, please. So as far as the timeline, basically where we are is in this June to October 2021 revisions of recommendations. We need to have our specific recommendations around changes to Chapter 58, and then maybe some big picture recommendations to the superintendent by October. But obviously starting last summer, there was some research, some surveys administered, focus groups, things like that happened that have kind of provided a starting point for the task force to consider, to think about as they've begun having these big picture discussions and thinking about specific revisions. If we could have the next slide, please. So I just wanted to visit for just a minute about our task force members. Here's a list of who those folks are. We have 18 folks, and I think they represent a good mix of EPP faculty, K-12 administrators, and trustees. And I did want to mention, I see Gary Lucen here from Bozeman Public Schools. He's a trustee. He is a member of our task force. And we also have one business agriculture parent. I believe she's from Conrad, Lisa Schmidt. And then I also wanted to highlight, we do have two folks from the Montana Indian community, Jennifer Smith, who is the chair of Macy, and Jonathan J. Eagleman, who is an Ojibwe Nayo language and culture instructor up in Box Elder. And I think he's been really wonderful in also keeping our conversation steered on a culturally responsive instruction, and particularly as it relates to our American Indian students. Next slide, please. So some of the things that the themes that came out of the focus group and the research as kind of a starting point. When we're talking about high quality educators, that balance of content knowledge and pedagogy, I think there's a feeling oftentimes in our EPPs, there is maybe too much emphasis on content knowledge, not enough emphasis on pedagogy, interpersonal skills, particularly when it relates to developing meaningful relationships, not just with students, but also with parents, community members. When we think about our K-12 educators in rural Montana, how critical it is for them to be have those really strong relationships with the community at large. So development of those interpersonal skills. And then as far as the actual teaching experience, while they are a candidate in the EPP program, increasing the variety of hands-on teaching experiences that they are go through in that process. Additionally, mentorship opportunities, having more opportunities to be mentored, to be around to converse with experienced educators who can provide him all those valuable insights as far as the profession and all of those, things that are so important. And then there's been some conversation around social emotional learning, trauma informed instruction. Again, how critical that really is. There's that old saying, your students won't know or won't care what you know if they don't know that you care. And so I think a lot of that falls into that bucket. So how do we better prepare our K-12 candidates to be the strong practitioners in those areas so that they can hit the ground better prepared to really impact their students. Also, looking at the landscape of education in Montana, increased flexibility and preparation and licensure, i.e. Do we have folks out there that have a lot of valuable skills, could potentially be wonderful educators, but maybe coming from a little bit of an alternative background, and how can we maybe somehow provide a process where they might be able to get it through an EPP and endorsed in some type of streamlined fashion to get them out in the field. Next slide, please. So some of the things in the task force really we primarily have been it's been more big picture conversation around some of the what we call lever topics, and just hearing from everybody their thoughts, their ideas, sort of their vision for what they see as the ideal teaching candidate as they come out of one of our EPPs. And so some of the themes that we've really touched on, again, are that differentiated learning, equality of educational opportunity. Again, there's been a lot of conversation around technological proficiency. We all have just gotten through a year and a half of COVID, and obviously technology and its role in our education system has expanded greatly, and some of those changes are here to stay. And so how do we ensure that our candidates really are proficient and ready to thrive in that landscape? A lot of conversation about increasing classroom experience. There has been some conversation around a year-long internship. That's been very interesting, thinking about what that might look like, how that might work, within our APPs, and then, some of the fiscal ramifications of that. I'm not sure where that's going to land. I know that Deputy Superintendent Allen has shared, some of the work that's happening in Arizona in this area for our task force to consider. I'm not sure how those recommendations will end up, but it's been a very interesting conversation. I did present on this to CISPAC last week, and there was a lot of conversation around if we're going to do this, what do we take out, right? Especially for those that are in the secondary education area. So that's something that's been happening. And then again, just that content knowledge versus college and career readiness standards and those other pedagogical things, excuse me. And then last week we did get to some specific recommendations that I believe the task force is going to vote on this week in 1058-501, which is teaching standards. And I think looking at trying to integrate some language that encourages social emotional learning and culturally responsive instruction. And again, particularly with regard to our American Indian students. Next slide, please. So that's essentially where we're at. I stand ready for any questions, and thank you again, everyone, for allowing me to be here today.
Thank you, Zach. So you understand, we back in September of 20, we asked the board if we could open up these chapters, licensure dealing with teachers and teacher prep programs, which is what 58 is. And they do dovetail very nicely. I also want to bring to this discussion, I have board member Lucine, who also is part of this. I know that Dean Harmon from MSU could not partake in our meeting today, but they're also looking in a bigger picture on how we use and we listen to what is happening in these task forces to reimagine what education can be in 5 years, in 10 years as well, and looking at the flexibilities. So thank you very much. Any questions that you might have for Zach at this point? I know there was a big shout out in the chat box from Angela McLean. Thank you. Anything for Zach? Great. Thank you very much, Zach, for being the glue and the cohesiveness and moving this large project forward. Thank you. So I did allude to Gary Lucine that is here. Gary, I don't know if you have the availability, if you would like to share anything about the discussion that you and Dean Harmon are having.
Yes, thank you very much, Superintendent Arnston. Yeah, glad to hear this discussion as well. And the discussion Dean Harmon and I have been having really began a couple of years ago when, I guess, first of all, I've been on the Bozeman School Board 16 years. I'm also on the MTSBA Board of Directors, been on that about 12 years. And I'm also on Dean Harmon's Advisory Council for College of Education. So getting to hear many different points of view on education in the state, and working with Allison a couple of years ago, we put together a meeting with the deans from MSU and the deans of education from U of M and our MTSBA board. And Board of Public Ed was also in attendance at that meeting. We had a very good discussion, small group discussions on issues, and both groups learned a lot from each other. We got very good feedback. So Dean Harmon and I are interested in reconvening something along that approach. So this is very early stages in development, reaching out to some of the major stakeholders already that have participated. And simply, the concept is simply to gather all the major stakeholders of education in the state and have a visionary discussion of education in the state. I think there's a lot of things we're doing well and right, but there's also challenges we face moving into the future. So we're hoping to initiate at least one meeting with the group, simply to see if this is even a feasible concept to pursue. It's our thought that if we move in this direction, it's going to be, could be several meetings over a lengthy period of time to kind of put some things together from a visionary status, but get everybody's voice in the room, hear each other's concerns, challenges, ideas, thoughts, and see if we can develop basically a common vision of education in the state that we can all pursue. So it's very early. We just appreciate when you get more information from us that you consider that, and we'll see where it goes from here. So thank you very much for the opportunity to explain this, and certainly open any questions anybody may have.
Questions for Gary? And I want to thank you for your service. My goodness, you know, I know we work together in the legislature on other avenues, but it's all about education. And I thank you for your service at the Bozeman School Board level, as well as with Montana School Boards Association. So more on this later. I just wanted to invite you to this discussion. It fits so well with licensing and well as our teacher prep programs in moving us forward. So again, on our agenda, and I very much appreciate your attendance and your willingness to listen. We have an update from the great work that Cheryl Allen has been working with our our CSCT programs in working through our mental health services that are offered at the local level. This is something that Cheryl Allen near and dear to her heart, as well as to mine. I mean, this is what Montana Hope is all about, and a great opportunity that the Montana legislature gave us, and we're working through it. So Deputy Allen, please.
Good morning, folks. Great to be here with you. I'm just going to highlight a couple items related to the comprehensive school and community treatment program that was placed at the OPI by this last legislative session in House Bill 671. We have been working with DPHHS now for a couple of months on what the guidance and what the accounting and processes need to look like. And so because it's a technical component and an administrative component, one of the pieces of this is to use what's called an IGT process. That simply means intergovernmental transfer. School districts today are required to come up with a non-federal match to be able to get Medicaid reimbursement for services to our students. That current match is 35%. So it's a 65-35 in Montana today. The legislature did allocate just over $2.2 million as bridge funding. That bridge funding will be utilized for claims, new claims starting July 1 until that bridge funding is gone. At the time the bridge funding is gone, then the local district is responsible for the match. So let's just give you a simple example. If the school district receives a bill from a provider of $100, the school district needs to send the match of $35 to the OPI where it resides in a special revenue account. DPHHS will confirm that indeed that is a bill that is Medicaid eligible. At the time of that notification, the OPI will send the match funds using intergovernmental transfer to DPHHS, who then submits the bill to Medicaid. When the bill is paid, the bill returning goes directly to the school district. Funds from this, for those who are interested, goes to the Fund 15 miscellaneous programs. There's a Medicaid CST reimbursement code, as well as a unique project recorder code related to that. What we have been working on is what the administrative cost that can be included in this cost back to offset district costs. And we have worked with DPHHS. We believe that we can be on pretty solid ground with an administrative / indirect rate at 17%. And while we can all do the math, so that same $100 example, $17 of that would be the administrative cost part of that rate. The actual costs of services coming in at the $83, which allows us to stay at that $100 rate, knowing the districts will get $17 back for the costs that they incurred. This is only an example. What we have worked really diligently on is what's auditable. And for us, schools must show an expense has been incurred. Reimbursement must be recorded. The schools have got to have proof through their records that a match was paid from authorized funds. Unauthorized match expenditures result in funds having to be returned to DPHHS. And so there's the brief overview of where we are on this issue today. We've held several meetings with our school districts that have CSCT programs. We will continue holding meetings with them. We've been invited to a provider meeting later this week, in which we're doing a Q&A session with our providers related to CSCT. I stand for what questions you may have.
Thank you, Cheryl. Lots and lots of work have occurred even prior to the governor's signature on this bill. So we have been in a lot of negotiations with DPHHS and other states as well to see exactly how to better serve our students and making sure that the continuity of services can flow seamlessly and not to burden our school district, but to make sure, more importantly, that our students are served. Any questions for Deputy Allen? And I know we're available. You can get a hold of us. I know at the bottom of our document here, we had Jay Phillips, because it's not just been few, it's been many here at the OPI. Jay is in charge of all the monies that do flow out to schools through e-grants, which of course this will be looked at as well through that. I do want to also say that we have some other members that have joined us. We have Dr. Ewell, who was the Catholic superintendent, has left us, and he and his family have journeyed out east, and we wish him all the best. And I do know that we have Angel from the Montana Catholic Schools Association out of Great Falls. Welcome, good morning. And I do believe we had Father Fleming as well from the diocese that was also part of our conversation as well. I know today we didn't just necessarily talk about the EANS program, which is the money that goes out to the non-public, but we do have great employees here at the OPI that are embracing this program for the betterment of all of our communities and those that serve our children in education outside of public school. So we can connect you with that, but welcome. There may be others as well, and I do know that we have our congressional partners on. Thank you very much for listening. I would like to offer in understanding that guidance to our schools needs to be uniform. Anybody who is with MQEC, so that's Diane, anyone dealing with our partners with Montpec, whether it be MFPE, the School Boards Association, school business officials, rural schools, and of course the school boards and school administrators. We would love to have a conversation with you to make sure that those state plans that Dr. Mergel talked about in relation to the LEA plan is unified. So the message that goes out from the state agency also understands the information that you're flowing out through your associations so that we can better serve our schools in a capacity of unified. So with that, if there's nothing else to add, we have had an hour long. It seems like a lot of presentations. This is one of the heavier lifts that we've had. We're here to serve if you have any questions. Again, this reflection will come out in the recording as well as any of the documents that we've shared. If there are no further comments or questions, thank you. I wish you all the best. Please stay well. Thank you. Bye-bye.